He kept the shop open, even when the credit book hadn't been paid in 3 months, even when the supplier was at the door, even when there was nothing left to eat in the back room. Victorian Britain had a system, and most people never saw it. Behind every polished shop window, behind every neatly stacked counter, there was a man running the numbers by candlelight, calculating whether he could survive another week. Not thrive, survive. 16-hour days. Customers who owed money and kept coming back for more. Wholesale prices climbing. Department stores arriving, undercutting everything overnight. The shopkeeper couldn't stop, couldn't close early, couldn't rest. The moment the ledger tipped the wrong way, it wasn't just the business that collapsed. It was the house, the family's name, the children's future. Thousands of these men vanished from history without a single record. Their shops were stripped, their debts registered in court, their names erased. They sold everything they had, and it still wasn't enough. To understand how this happened, how an entire class of people could work themselves to exhaustion and still lose everything, we need to go back. Back to the moment the shop window first gleamed, back to when the dream still looked like a plan. If stories like this one stay with you, histories where the surface is clean and the damage runs deep, consider subscribing. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching this from? To understand how this system really worked, we need to start at the beginning, before the debt, before the collapse, at the moment when a shopkeeper's life still felt like a promise. In the middle decades of the 19th century, Victorian Britain was the most commercially active civilization on Earth. London alone contained more than 3 million people by 1860, and its streets pulsed with a kind of organized hunger, a constant circulation of goods, money, ambition, and need. The railways had changed everything. Raw materials arrived faster. Manufactured goods spread further. Cities that had once been modest market towns became industrial centers almost overnight, their populations doubling and tripling within a single generation. And with all those people came an insatiable demand for the basic provisions of daily life. Bread, meat, cloth, candles, tobacco, thread, soap, sugar, and 100 other necessities that someone had to sell. That someone was the shopkeeper. Across England, Scotland, and Wales, tens of thousands of independent traders opened their doors each morning and became the invisible infrastructure of Victorian civilization. The grocer on the corner, the draper 2 streets over, the butcher whose shop smelled of iron and sawdust before the sun was fully up. These men and women were not wealthy merchants. They were not industrialists. They occupied a precise and precarious position in the Victorian class system, above the laborer, below the gentleman, and answerable to both. Respectability was not optional. It was the condition of survival. The moment a shopkeeper's reputation cracked, his trade cracked with it. The system that sustained them was older than the Victorian era itself, but the era had made it more demanding than ever before. Credit was the lifeblood of the high street. A shopkeeper extended credit to his customers, as a matter of course, because his customers, many of them working-class families living on weekly wages, could not always pay at the moment of purchase. The grocer wrote it in his book. The draper tracked it in columns. The cobbler remembered it by face. Credit was trust made visible, and it bound the shopkeeper to his neighborhood in ways that went far beyond commerce. But something was already wrong with that arrangement. Something that most men only discovered when it was too late to change course. The physical world of the Victorian shop was built entirely around the performance of order and abundance. Window displays were dressed with obsessive precision, bolts of fabric stacked in color gradients, jars of preserved goods arranged by size, cuts of meat laid out like a still life painted for an audience that passed by twice a day. The smell of a Victorian grocer's shop was particular and unmistakable. Sacks of dried goods, the faint sweetness of molasses, the sharpness of vinegar, sawdust on the floor to absorb the moisture tracked in from the street. Behind the counter, shelves rose to the ceiling, each one dedicated to a specific category of goods. Nothing was where it shouldn't be. Everything communicated control. But the back room told a different story. In the back room, small, usually windowless, often damp, the real arithmetic of the business lived. Ledgers stacked on a single table, receipts pinned to the wall, invoices from wholesale suppliers written in careful copperplate, each one representing money already spent on goods that had not yet been paid for by the customers who bought them. The shopkeeper moved between those two worlds every day. The performed abundance of the front and the quiet, grinding arithmetic of the back. Most people only ever saw the front. The shopkeeper could never forget the back. His name, in thousands of cases that survive in court records and trade directories of the period, was ordinary. Thomas Briggs, William Hartley, Samuel Marsh, men from modest backgrounds, sons of craftsmen, of small farmers, of clerks, who had scraped together enough capital to take a lease on a shop and stock it for the first season. They were not dreamers in the romantic sense. They were calculators. They had studied the trade, apprenticed under established men, learned the rhythms of the market and the psychology of the customer. They believed, with a sincerity that is almost painful in retrospect, that hard work and careful management were sufficient armor against failure. They were wrong, but they didn't know that yet. The path to opening a shop in Victorian England required a specific combination of capital, credit, and courage. A modest grocer's shop in a working-class district of Manchester or Birmingham in the 1850s might require between £50 and £200 to establish, enough to pay the first quarter's rent, purchase initial stock, fit the shelving, and survive the first weeks before income began to arrive. For a man earning a tradesman's wage, that was anywhere from 1 to 4 years of savings. Many borrowed the difference from family. Some took loans at interest rates that would have seemed punishing by any measure. A few found silent partners, relatives with modest capital who wanted a share of the trade without the labor of running it. However the money was gathered, the moment the lease was signed, the clock began. The first months were the most dangerous, and most shopkeepers knew it. Stock had to be purchased before it could be sold. Suppliers, the wholesale merchants who dominated the supply chains of Victorian commerce, demanded payment on terms that did not always align with the rhythms of retail. A shopkeeper might buy goods on 30-day credit from his supplier, sell those goods over 60 days to his customers, and collect payment from those customers over 90 days or more. The gap between those numbers was where fortunes quietly disappeared. It was a structural problem built into the trade itself, and it had existed for generations. But in the Victorian era, as competition intensified and margins tightened, that gap became something closer to a trap. For the first few years, if the location was good and the service was attentive, a shopkeeper like Thomas Briggs could make the numbers work. He knew his customers by name. He knew which families paid reliably and which ones needed gentle reminding. He knew when the mill wages came in and timed his largest deliveries to follow. He kept his shop open 6 days a week from before 7 in the morning until after 9 at night. He swept the front step himself. He dressed the window on Saturday evening so it would be fresh for Sunday passers-by, even though the shop was closed. He did everything right. And for a while, everything right was enough. But something was already wrong. Not with Briggs, specifically. With the system itself. The pressure arrived gradually, the way pressure always does when a structure is failing from within rather than breaking from without. It did not announce itself. It accumulated. A trusted customer, a foreman at the nearby foundry, a man who had been settling his account reliably every quarter for 3 years, fell ill, lost his position. His debt sat in the ledger, growing no larger, but also never shrinking. Briggs said nothing. The man had a family. The man would recover. That was how the calculation worked in a neighborhood where reputation was currency, and coldness was remembered long after debts were forgotten. Then came a second account in arrears, then a third. The ledger, which had once been a document of modest confidence, began to feel like a record of losses that hadn't fully arrived yet. Briggs spent longer in the back room in the evenings, cross-referencing columns, calculating what he was owed against what he owed, searching for a margin that kept narrowing with each passing month. The front of the shop still looked the same. He made sure of that. The window was still dressed on Saturday evening. The shelves were still full. The floor was still swept. The performance of abundance continued, even as the abundance itself quietly drained away. His wife noticed before he admitted it. She kept her own set of figures, not because he asked her to, but because she understood, with the particular intelligence of someone who had grown up watching her father's small business breathe and contract, that the numbers had a life of their own and that life needed watching. She saw the wholesale invoices arriving more frequently, the amounts slightly larger each time, as Briggs ordered ahead to secure stock before prices rose further. She saw the credit book filling up with names that were no longer paying. She said nothing directly. Instead, she began making small adjustments, reducing the household's own consumption, cutting back on the coal delivered for the back room, finding ways to stretch the food further without it being obvious at the table. She was managing a crisis that hadn't been officially named yet. Meanwhile, something was changing in the streets outside the shop that neither of them had the language to fully describe. It was not a single event. It was a shift in the atmosphere of commerce itself. Slow, structural, and absolute. And before we go any further into what that shift meant for families like the Briggses, if this story has already made you think differently about the world you live in and the systems that hold it together, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. Do you think what happened next was inevitable, or could it have been stopped? The thing that changed was competition, not the ordinary competition of one grocer against another, two butchers on the same street adjusting their prices and their smiles to attract the same pool of customers. That kind of competition had always existed, and the Victorian shopkeeper was well equipped to survive it. What arrived in the 1860s and accelerated through the 1870s and 1880s was something of an entirely different order, a new architecture of retail that operated by rules the independent tradesman had never been designed to play by. The cooperative movement had been growing quietly in the industrial towns of the north since the 1840s, beginning with the Rochdale Pioneers, a group of 28 weavers who pooled their resources to open a small store in 1844. By the 1860s, the cooperative model had spread across Lancashire, Yorkshire, and the Midlands, and it was winning customers not through charm or credit, but through price. Cooperatives bought in volume. They paid in cash to wholesalers and extracted discounts that no individual shopkeeper could negotiate. They sold goods at prices that undercut the high street by margins small enough to seem trivial on any single purchase, but enormous in aggregate over the course of a working family's year. And then, crucially, they returned the surplus to their members as a dividend, the famous divvy that working-class families received at the end of the quarter, a small windfall that rewarded loyalty with cash. Against that, a shopkeeper's personal service and neighborhood knowledge felt increasingly like a luxury that poorer customers could no longer afford to value. But the cooperative was not the only force reshaping the landscape of Victorian trade. In the wealthier districts of London and the major provincial cities, a new kind of retail establishment was emerging that represented a different threat entirely. The department store, Whiteley's in Bayswater, Harrods in Knightsbridge, Lewis's in Manchester and Liverpool, offered something that no independent shopkeeper could replicate. Everything under one roof, at fixed and clearly marked prices, with a level of spectacle and comfort that transformed the act of shopping from an errand into an event. These establishments did not target the working-class customer who bought on credit from the corner grocer. They targeted the aspiring middle-class customer who might have shopped at a respectable independent draper or haberdasher, the exact customer whose patronage gave the Victorian shopkeeper his claim to respectability. As those customers drifted toward the department store's gaslit aisles and uniformed floor staff, the independent trader felt the absence of their accounts like a slow hemorrhage. Briggs noticed it first in the women's fabric trade. His wife had mentioned casually that Mrs. Holt, a reliable customer who had bought her household linens from him for 6 years, had taken the omnibus to the new drapery emporium near the town centre. She'd gone once out of curiosity, and then again, and now she sent her daughter rather than coming herself. The daughter didn't know Briggs by name. She just wanted the price. Briggs could match it, barely, but only by accepting a margin so thin it barely justified the stock. He matched it anyway because losing Mrs. Holt meant losing the perception that his shop was where respectable women bought their fabric. And perception, in the Victorian high street, was not decoration. It was load-bearing. The crisis didn't break all at once. It degraded. Month by month, the gap between what was owed to Briggs and what Briggs owed to his suppliers widened by small amounts that felt manageable in isolation and catastrophic in accumulation. He began delaying payments to his wholesale accounts. He negotiated extensions with suppliers who had known him for years. Men who trusted him personally, even as their own accountants, marked his file with increasing concern. He reduced his stock slightly. Not enough for customers to notice, he told himself, though some of them did. He stopped ordering the higher-margin specialty items that had once distinguished his shop from the bare functionality of the cooperative store. He was not cutting costs. He was dismantling the thing that had made his shop worth entering. His wife found the first formal demand letter on a Thursday evening in November, tucked between two invoices in the pile he left on the table each night. She didn't mention it. She placed it back in the pile, exactly where she had found it. But she lay awake that night while he slept, calculating sums that no longer added up in any direction she tried. The formal demand was from a wholesale provisions merchant in Birmingham, a firm with which Briggs had done business for 11 years. The letter was polite, in the way that Victorian commercial correspondence was always polite even when it meant something savage. It expressed confidence in Mr. Briggs's integrity and his long record of reliable settlement, and it requested that the outstanding balance of £43 and 7 shillings be cleared within 30 days. £43. It was not an enormous sum in the abstract. In the context of a shop generating less than £12 of clear profit in a good month and operating at a loss in 3 of the last 5 months, it was a number with no solution. He went to see his brother-in-law, a man with a modest but stable position at the gasworks, and borrowed £20. He told him it was a temporary difficulty, a seasonal slowdown, a cluster of late-paying accounts, nothing structural. His brother-in-law believed him, or chose to. The £20 bought another 2 months. It did not solve anything. It only deferred the arithmetic. The moment Briggs had spent years keeping at the edge of his vision finally arrived on a grey Tuesday morning in early spring, when the bailiff appeared at the shop door before the first customer of the day. He was a quiet man, older, professionally neutral, with the practiced blankness of someone who had stood in 100 doorways exactly like this one and said the same words in exactly the same tone. He presented the paperwork. He explained the process. He was not unkind. He had no reason to be. Briggs stood behind his own counter while the inventory was assessed, the shelves he had stocked and dressed and restocked for 9 years, the window he had dressed every Saturday evening, the ledger on the back table with its columns of names and numbers, some settled, many not, a few that would never be recovered. The bailiff's assistant moved through the shop with a pencil and a notebook, recording what was there. Briggs said nothing. There was nothing to say that the ledger hadn't already said more clearly. The shop was stripped within a week. The stock was auctioned. The fixtures, the shelving, the counter, the glass display case near the door, were sold separately to a man who was opening a new establishment 2 streets over. The lease was surrendered. The debt was registered at the county court, and Thomas Briggs's name entered the public record of Victorian insolvency, alongside several thousand others that year alone. His wife took their 2 children to her mother's house in Salford. Briggs found work as a warehouse clerk for a wholesale grocer, the same kind of firm whose invoices he had once delayed paying. He worked there for 14 years. He never spoke about the shop, not because the memory was too painful, though it was, but because in the culture of Victorian commercial life, a failed tradesman was a man who had broken a social contract. The failure was not merely financial, it was moral. It was the proof that he had promised more than he could deliver, to suppliers, to customers, to his family, and to the image of himself as a man capable of making the numbers work. What remained of his shop existed only in records that no one looked at anymore. Court documents, trade directories from years when his name still appeared under the heading of established grocers, a single surviving ledger page photographed decades later by a local historian who found it lining the bottom of a storage box in a municipal archive. The page is unremarkable. Columns of names, figures, dates, a few accounts marked settled, most are not. The building that housed his shop still stands, though nothing about it acknowledges what it once was. At street level, the original Victorian shopfront has been modified twice over, the window frame replaced, the entrance repositioned, the original signage long gone. On the facade, at the height where a hanging sign would once have announced the proprietor's name and trade, there is only a patch of brick slightly cleaner than the rest, where the attachment was removed. At some point no one remembers. That cleaner patch of brick is what is left of Thomas Briggs's 9 years of work. A faint outline, a ghost of a sign that once told the street that someone here was trying to hold the line between survival and ruin. He held it for as long as he could, and then the wall won.